Welcome to Playing Above the Line, where we interview entrepreneurs, business owners, and community activists to get their thoughts and perspectives on leadership. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group, a business consulting and accounting firm focused on preparing clients for the future through innovation and positive growth. Welcome to Playing Above the Line. I'm Alan, and this episode is a little bit different today because it's episode number 100 of Playing Above the Line. And so Kari thinks that's a big deal, and I think it's a big deal too. And so we're going to take some time today to acknowledge that and celebrate the milestone that we reached as a podcast. And you just heard producer Kari, and she has been a very big part of this podcast. I mean, if she didn't do what she does, which is a lot, then you guys wouldn't hear us every week. And so she does everything from booking the guests to sending them the show primer to scheduling the recordings, and then she edits after the fact. And so if it wasn't for her, you guys wouldn't get to hear us every week. And so I appreciate that. Now, I can tell you that Kari does not appreciate me right now because I have finally, after 99 episodes, gotten her on this side of the microphone. And so I wanted her to be a part of this episode because she is such a big part of the podcast. And so without further ado, Kari Wolf, welcome.
Thank you, Alan. It is not necessarily that I don't appreciate being here. It's just that my talents lie off the microphone and your talents are on the microphone. And okay. I like our little comfort zones of you doing what you're good at and me doing what I'm good at.
All right. Well, I'll be the judge of that because I think you're going to do just fine. So, well, like I said, this is episode number 100. And other than myself, you're the only other person that's really been a part and heard every episode that we've done so far. And so I thought it was appropriate to get you to come in and spend some time with us and talk about maybe, hopefully, what you've learned along the way, the last 99 episodes or so. So we've had a lot of good guests and a lot of good thoughts and perspectives on leadership. So that's why we're here. I will say for myself, when we first started talking about this whole podcast thing, I knew what a podcast was, okay? Because I had listened to some.
Yep.
But I had no idea how you recorded one, how you produced one. I mean, how it ended up from, your little SD card on whatever you're recording on to iTunes and Spotify. So early on, you and I had lunch with a friend of the podcast and the firm, Karen Simmons. And so she was very instrumental in pointing us in the right direction and allowing us to kind of pick her brain about what she learned and doing her own podcast. And so Karen was a big part of what we started to do from the beginning.
She was fantastic, and she gave us our first piece of advice that we've heard repeated a few times by different leaders, which is, if you are not an expert at something, delegate it to someone who is. And so she led right. us to the next person who really helped us along the way, and that is Johnny Gwynn with Deep Fried Studios, where we recorded the first many episodes, and he got us going and showed us the ropes of editing and recording and just kind of the whole world. Johnny was
great, and we learned a lot from him. He had a lot to do with the kind of the format of the show and letting us learn and know how the show should flow. So that was a big part of our experience early on. And even though we've kind of moved on and taken some stuff in-house, I mean, we definitely would not, and you, I think, especially on the editing side, would definitely not be able to do what you're doing today without Johnny's leadership and guidance. So yeah, Johnny Gwynn was a big influence. We appreciate him.
Shout out to Deep Fried Studios.
Yeah. And then, so Dennis Sharon and I, co-hosted the first, year and a half of the podcast. And early on, he kind of had an idea for a podcast, and you and I had talked about separately about trying to do something. And so we really didn't know the other person was leaning in that direction, but we finally found out that we were all thinking the same thing. And Dennis is actually the one that kind of came up with the idea of talking about leadership and entrepreneurship and that kind of thing. And so Dennis was a big reason why we chose the topic that we did. And I think it's played out well over the past 99 episodes.
Right. I remember early on, you and I were really only primarily listening to comedy podcasts. And
right.
we were pretty sure we couldn't pull that one off.
Yep.
And the other thing that we knew we didn't even want to attempt pulling off was a podcast on accounting.
No, that I can't think of anything. There are some podcasts out there by some firms that I respect that talk about accounting. That just was not what we decided we wanted to do. Now, you wouldn't let me do a true crime podcast, which really...
I would let you do a true crime podcast.
Maybe we need to reevaluate this whole Playing Above the Line thing, because that is one genre, I guess, you say that I enjoy listening to. But I think leadership and entrepreneurship has served us well over the past couple of years, and so it's been great. So here's what we're going to do. I had asked you probably a week or two ago, since, like I said, you have been here for every episode that we've recorded, to kind of look back and contemplate and think about what you've heard over the past couple of years. And then we were each going to write down a word, just one word that we thought kind of embodied leadership and what we learned. And so we both have a word. Yours must be in your mind because I don't see an envelope. I have mine in an envelope because I didn't want there to be any nefarious, activities going on where we switched words or something if we had the same word. So mine is in an envelope and
a sealed envelope.
A sealed envelope, no doubt. So how should we do this? Do I go first or do you go first?
I think as the professional speaker, you should be the one who goes first.
Okay, I'm just not professional. All right, here we go. So I'm opening my envelope here because it really is sealed. We're not just saying that because we're trying to fool y'all, so it is. All right, so my word is relationships.
Yay! That's what I thought you might pick.
Well, and I know that over the course of many episodes, I kind of mentioned the fact that I thought that's what a lot of our guests ultimately were talking about, relationships. And in my opinion, if you don't get the relationship part correct, it's hard to be an effective leader. And I'm not talking about a friend type relationship, although I don't think that that's wrong to be friends with the people you're leading and so forth. But I'm just talking about the professional relationship that you have to be able to be an effective leader and to be an effective team. And so I think that relationships cover a lot of what we've heard the past 2 years, and it covers things like communication, active listening, empathy, coaching and mentoring, consistency, delegation, team over self, servant leadership, all those things that we've heard a lot of our guests talk about. I think that word relationship captures those. And so I do firmly believe, after reflecting over what we've heard the last couple of years, that one word says a lot and it means a lot. And if you can get the relationship part right, I think you're way far down the road in being an effective leader. So that's my word.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that if you went back and listened to all of the episodes, you wouldn't find a single one that lacks the word relationship somewhere in it, even if it isn't one of the main points that are talked about, because I do think it goes hand in hand with leadership.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's time for my word.
It is.
And so what I did was I went and listened to a couple of my favorite episodes, and I thought Alan might choose the word relationship. So I thought, what is another word that I could choose? And I thought, well, what is one of the things that helps develop those relationships? And so the word I decided to land on is empower, or empowerment, however you want to take it. Because for me, empowering is what develops that relationship. If you want to be a leader who has followers, if you want to be a leader who is effective, you do need to have those relationships, and you can develop them through empowering others and trusting them and building up confidence, and sort of all the words that you just listed that describe relationship, I think can also be part of how you build up a relationship where you're empowering somebody.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting that you chose that word, because one thing that I thought you might ask, and I'm not going to ask you this, but I ask everyone to give me their definition of leadership, or what they think a good leader is. And so I really realized that I had never come up with that on my own, although I ask it every single time. I never really kind of sat down and fleshed out what my definition would be. And so I actually used the word empower in my definition. And so I think that leadership is empowering others to reach their fullest potential to accomplish a common goal. And so that must mean that we've both been listening pretty well over the past couple of years, since we both kind of came up with the same, you thought I was going to say relationship. I like the word empower. I used it in my definition. So we learned something, Kari. Yay.
Yay, good for us. And I did not come up with the definition of leadership, but I did come up with my 3 qualities of a good leader.
Okay, good.
So the 3 that I landed on are, and maybe the first one doesn't make as much sense, but I'll explain it if I need to. But I said experienced, decisive, and then transparent. Mm-hmm. And so by experienced, we've talked a lot about whether a leader is born or made. Right. And I think that even if a leader is born, they don't develop those skills until they've gotten to see what it's like to have positive reactions, negative reactions, successes and failures. And I think that's such a big part of being an effective leader, is learning what does and doesn't work, both for you and for the people that you're working with. And then decisive, I think, kind of speaks for itself. You need to be able to make decisions. Yep. And then I think transparency and honesty is a big part of being a good leader. You want your team to be able to trust you. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean like from a business perspective being transparent and telling people things that they don't necessarily need to know ahead of time, but do tell them the things that they need to know in order to grow and be effective and reach both their goals and your goals.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I don't know that, I know that decisiveness and transparency, I think, have been specifically mentioned, but I'm not sure that anyone ever really said experienced, but I think that's a great point in that you could have all the, I don't know what you want to call it, natural talent or natural charisma in the world, but if you don't actually get out there and get that experience of leading a team and having people follow you and that kind of thing, I mean, it's kind of hard to be an effective leader if you've never done it, right? So,
right.
Right. So, I'm glad that we didn't have the same word. I didn't think that we would, but if we had, I came up with my 1A word. Okay, just in case we had the same word, and so my next choice would have been self-awareness. I think that's almost, I mean, that is right there, up there, just almost even with relationships, in my opinion, because I strongly feel, and look, I have been exposed to, and you have too, leaders I know that lack self-awareness. And so if you don't know what your weaknesses are, if you don't know kind of where the holes are, and we've all got them, in your leadership style and what you do or how you communicate with people or whatever, you're not going to be an effective leader. Now, you could be a leader. You might just be a bad one, right?
Right. One of the things that I initially was thinking about when you told me to come up with a word was emotional intelligence. And I didn't think that was quite the word. I knew that wasn't the word that I was looking for, and that's part of what sparked me to go back and listen to some other episodes. But that's what self-awareness really is having the awareness of other people's emotions and taking them into consideration. Right. When you're making decisions or when you're being transparent, you need to be thinking about the person that you're talking to. Mm-hmm. Lacking self-awareness can be a fatal flaw.
No doubt. I mean, a big one too. Well, Kari, I think that we can both, it has reinforced in my mind that we both learned something over the past couple of years. I think that's a good thing.
I certainly hope so.
But I'll tell you one thing that, just looking back 2 years ago when we first started this, I really didn't know how it was going to turn out. I had no idea if we were going to be able to, number one, find 100 people that wanted to talk to us, okay? And then number two, if we made it to 100 episodes or whatever pick your number, whatever that number is, whether, what we were doing or what we are doing would still be relevant. I think it is, because I think that the way that we've formed this podcast and the way that it's kind of evolved over the last couple of years is that we're talking about the same thing over and over again, yes. And then a lot of our guests use the same words, yes, they do. But I think what makes it interesting and unique is that every single person that comes on is talking about leadership as they see it through the lens of their own experience. And so no two people's experience is ever the same. And so they bring their own perspective to what they're talking about. And I think that I don't know, I just don't think that it hadn't gotten stale yet,
Right. I agree with you. And before we sat down to talk, I was thinking, well, what if Alan asks, where do we want the podcast to be in 5 years? Because that was really, that's a big thing that we ask guests. And I thought, we didn't even have that discussion when we started the podcast. We didn't say, where do we want to be at episode 52 at 1 year? Where do we want to be when we get to our 2-year mark, or episode 100, the big milestones? And I think that we have been lucky that we ended up on a topic that everybody has experienced. Anybody can talk about what good or bad leadership is to them, because it's always going to depend on how far along you are in your journey of learning how to become a leader. And so I think that there's a lot of value both in getting guests on who haven't talked to us, and then even we've had some guests on twice, and I think that there's some value there too, because people grow and change.
Right.
And so this is really a topic that's never going to be something that could go away. And I'm not saying that doesn't mean that we don't change or develop the podcast, but I think it's a topic that is ever evolving and will always be interesting to people who want to continue to advance in such an important aspect.
Yeah, and there's no doubt about that. And, just a little behind the scenes baseball here. I mean, you and I constantly talk about whether we think the podcast is still relevant and whether we think the content is still worth the effort and time that we put into it. Because let's be honest, this is not there's a time commitment to it, and there's a financial commitment to it. I mean, it's not something that just,
and there's an emotional commitment to it,
right? And so it's not something that we just kind of herky jerky put together with no thought and just kind of put it on autopilot and let it go. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is our commitment, or at least my commitment, and I think you'd probably agree, is that as long as we think we're giving good, relevant content that people can learn from, then we're still going to continue to do what we've been doing. Now, that's not to say that we'll always be talking about the same thing in the same format. I think that you and I both are committed to making sure that what we do has value. And I think if we ever think or if we ever see that there's no value in what we're doing, then we might decide to do something else. But right now, I think that value's still there. So
I think so too. And speaking of that, I think that our listeners would really appreciate an opportunity to get to know the host of the show a little bit better.
Oh, do you?
I do.
Okay.
So I think that it would be fun to ask you a few of the questions that we ask our guests.
Okay.
And I would like to start with mentorship.
Mm-hmm.
So I do consider you to be a good leader. And I think that that's something that you've learned along the way, and not that you don't have natural ability.
Oh, thanks.
I certainly think that you have a natural charisma about you, but I'd like to know who is a mentor to that really guided you along the way and made an impact in your life.
Yeah, I could name several, I think, but anytime anyone ever asks me that, the first person that pops in my mind is Dr. Kay Guess, and she was a professor of mine at Samford University, and I had her for a lot of tax classes and auditing and that kind of thing. So Samford was a small school. We had a small class. And so I had Dr. Guess a lot in my junior and senior year. But her energy was contagious. And I'll tell you, we were her very first class at Samford. She come to Samford from Baylor. And I think we were actually the first class that she ever walked into at Samford was our tax class. And so she walked in, I'll never forget it, at 9 o'clock in the morning, put her stuff down. She didn't say, "Hi, my name is Dr. Guess. Good morning. How you doing?" She said, "Look, we got to get going. We're already behind." And she just hit the ground running. And eventually we didn't, find out what her name was. And that was just her passion. And so I learned a lot about having passion for what you do, giving everything that you do 110%. She taught us a lot about just being young professionals. I mean, we were making that transition between high school and college and then about to go into the real world. And so she was very instrumental in just guiding us on how to be an effective, considerate, successful young professional back in the mid-90s or whenever I came through college. And so
don't give away your age,
I know,
Alan.
dated myself a little bit there. Anyway, she and we still communicate. I mean, anytime I'm in Birmingham, we'll have dinner. As a matter of fact, she came through my hometown on the way to the beach last year, and so she stopped and we had breakfast. And so she is somebody that I've continued to stay in contact with. And yeah, she's definitely someone that I would consider a mentor for sure.
Yeah, she sounds wonderful.
Yeah, she is. She's good people.
Excellent. Okay, so I think one of the more impactful questions that we ask, especially from a younger leader perspective, someone like me who's still learning and developing, is to hear what are some areas that you think that you could improve in your leadership. Because for me, I could name anything. I feel like there's areas for me to improve everywhere. And so to me, it's nice to hear when another leader, especially someone that has a leadership podcast, is in a business ownership position, is in a position that you can respect and look up to and aspire to be one day, says, yeah, I have faults too. I have flaws and there are things that I'm working to improve. So I'm just a little curious, what would yours be?
Oh, Kari, the list is so long, but I'll give you two that consistently pop up, and I think really I do need to improve on both of these. The first one is time management. We're given 24 hours, and so some people can do a lot with that 24 hours, and some people don't get quite as much done. And so sometimes, I don't know if it's that you've got so much going on or what, but we're just trying to juggle work and life. Sometimes I think I get kind of bogged down in trying to determine what to do next, and then I kind of don't do anything next. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
it's just kind of,
I do know what you mean.
So just, and I've always I'm always on the lookout for some sort of a time management tool or whatever, and I just never really have found one that works for me. But so time management, I think, is one that I could definitely improve on. And the other one is delegation. I mean, look, I'm not a type A personality, but I know a lot of type A's have a hard time delegating. But I do think that if you get to a certain level of, or certain point in your career where you're in a leadership position, you've got to learn to trust your team. Okay, if you've got a team that you put together, trust them to do their job, right? And sometimes I get kind of caught up in the, well, I can do it better, or I think I can do it better, or I can do it quicker, or maybe they won't do it the way that I want it done, and so I'll just do it myself. I mean, number one, that's not growing your team because you're not giving them increased responsibility to do anything, right?
Right.
And then number two, it may not be the best use of my time. And so delegation is one that I still today struggle with that. I try to do better. Some days I do better than others, but I think it's important for any leader to be able to trust their team, and it's a matter of trust. So those are two: time management and delegation. So,
Yeah, I can definitely agree with you on the second one. Delegation is not my strong suit either. Surprise, surprise, for anybody who ever met me. Well, I imagine from a leader's perspective, it's also scary to give somebody else a task that you think they're going to fail at. I mean, because sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes that's what delegation is, and people learn from failures. We talk about that all the time. You have to fail forward and learn how to get better at something. And I can't imagine delegating a task to someone and knowing that they aren't going to do as good at it as I will.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I will say that that's something that I've had to struggle with in my personal life as well, because, and I've tried not to, but with my children, I've got 2 children, 18 and 20. They're both at Auburn, and I have not done a good job at letting them fail at things. And so I do what I do with them and for them under the auspices of, love and protection and that kind of thing, but I'm really not doing them any long-term favors if they're not able to go out there and make their own mistakes and then learning how to recover from them. That's a big part of failure is learning how to recover. Failure is not a failure if you learn something from it. So right. Anyway, so.
Right. I can't relate to the children, but I do have a dog. My dog's name is Dansby, and he will never fail at anything because he is perfect.
He is perfect. Yes, I've seen him, and he's cute too.
Also not a good leadership lesson to teach your children. Okay. Well, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's definitely something that I think younger leaders and older leaders alike can learn and grow from, and maybe feel a little bit of camaraderie with, knowing that there are others out there who have similar struggles. So the last few questions I want to ask you, because we are still in COVID, I would like to ask you the questions of what have you had to let go of during the coronavirus period of like quarantine and things slowing down that you won't be bringing back in? And then what have you started doing more that you would like to keep doing once everything goes back to quote unquote the new normal?
Right. Well, I'll tell you on the first one, and I don't really know a good way to phrase this, but I'm just going to call it the fluff and filler in my life. Like I said, we had 2 children and they were involved in a lot. And so we were very busy. And so really when everything kind of got shut down and we were kind of forced to not do anything other than, in our case, I mean, we were lucky enough that we could still go to work, but I mean, go to work and go home.
Thank goodness.
Right. But I had some time to think about whether or not the activities and even the people that I was spending time with on some level was it adding value to my life, number one, and then number 2, was it adding value to my family's life? And so if the answer was no, then, I'm not going to bring those things back in. And so, and I don't have anything specifically really to tell you other than we just had a lot of noise in our lives.
Yeah, that's okay. I feel that.
Yeah. And so, we were forced to stop all of it, and then we're slowly, bringing stuff back and that kind of thing, but the stuff that doesn't add value to my life or my family's life, I'm not bringing back.
I think a lot of people can relate to that, even without a specific example.
Yeah. So, and the second one. So one thing that I've started to do, that was it, right?
Mm-hmm. That you'll continue to. This is your question.
Right.
I didn't even come up with this.
Yeah. It's kind of the reverse of what I just talked about. So again, very busy family, busy kids, a lot of social activities and that kind of thing. We started spending much more time together than we had before. My son was at Auburn. He had to come home. My daughter was a high school senior. She had to start remote learning and they stopped going to school at her high school. And so we spent a lot of time as a family together, which was wonderful. I mean, we had more dinners around the table than I think we've had probably in the past 6 years in 6 months. And so that was a good thing. And so even though they are back at Auburn now, my wife and I still sit down and eat dinner at the table most every night. And before we would just maybe, grab something and sit in front of the TV, or we wouldn't, have different schedules. So she would eat and I would eat, whatever. But just that family time, and it sounds trite and cliche, but I mean, that's the truth, So just more time with them, concentrating on the people that are the most important to me. So
I don't think it sounds trite at all. It comes back to outside of the realm of leadership, relationships, and your family is the most important relationship that you've got. And if you were able to spend some time developing those, you have an opportunity to see how impactful it is and you can continue it. I think that sounds wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, it has been. Look, COVID is awful. I hate it. And I wish it would go away tomorrow. I don't think it is, but there's some good things that have come from it. And that question I've asked, you're right. I've asked it, those 2 questions, for the past probably 4 or 5 months now. And there are some good things that have come from a very, very bad situation. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, you can always find the silver linings.
Yep, agreed.
All right. So on to the fun questions.
Okay.
We'll do two. So one of my favorite questions that you used to ask people that I don't think's been in circulation quite as much lately is, if a little green alien spaceship lands on the interstate and stops you on your way back to Bruton today as you're driving home on is it 65? I'm directionally
No, Highway
challenged.
31. I don't take the interstate to get here, but that's okay.
What?
No.
Okay, this is an off-mic conversation.
65 goes from Bruton to Mobile, but I come
No, but
through.
you can connect. Okay, this is an off-mic conversation. Anyway, so the little alien lands. You'll be on 98 because I know where that is, and stops you on 98 and says, "Take me to your leader." Where do you take her?
Oh, it's a female alien this time.
It is.
Okay, I like it. Gosh, I tell you what. Well, it gets back to my dad because he was my first role model, still is, and he's been a great head of our family, and I firmly believe that those of us that are lucky enough to have fathers that are active in our lives, they are the head of the family. And so even though I'm 48 years old and have 2 kids in college, he's still someone who I consider to be my leader.
That's pretty awesome. And hopefully, when your kids are 40 something, they'll be saying the same thing about you.
Hopefully,
I'm sure
we'll see.
I'm sure they will be. Okay, so last question. What is on heavy rotation on your iTunes or Spotify music list?
Oh, gosh.
Or Sirius XM?
Right. Okay. Well, I would consider myself having a pretty eclectic taste in music. So anything from the Hamilton soundtrack, which has been a big one lately.
Yes,
my daughter's
same.
obsessed, and I kind of am too. Classic country, so any kind of Conway Twitty, Loretta Lynn, Hank Williams, Willie Nelson, Dolly Parton, John Conley. I mean, all those people. The old 70s and 80s country, 60s country, and that kind of thing is big. Let's see, what else? I'm not a big jazz fan. 80s hair bands, I love. Any kind of 80s hair band music. Anything really along those lines you can find me listening to. But it's not, I don't have one particular thing that I listen to, but just a lot of stuff.
Excellent. A mixed bag. Okay, so this is actually the last question.
Okay.
From the Hamilton soundtrack, what is your favorite song?
My daughter thinks that she's asked me this question too. She thinks I'm weird when I say this, but it's actually Helpless. I just think I just like it. It's I don't really know what it is about it, but every time it comes on, I just kind of find myself hitting the rewind button a couple of times and listen to it 2 or 3 times. So that's a good one.
I like that. I would never have guessed it, but I also really like that song.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just very endearing.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a good one.
And King George, anytime King George is on the stage,
yes.
he's,
Yeah.
But other than that, Helpless is a good one. So, well, Kari, this has been a journey. It's been a fun one. So I appreciate you and, again, everything that you've done. I appreciate everyone who has helped us out from, again, Karen Simmons and Johnny Gwynn and Dennis for the concept, and Earl Blackman, one of my partners, for the name, and
right.
even some of our co-hosts that came and stepped in while Dennis was out on sabbatical. So it's taken a whole village, as they say, to produce and to
raise this
to
baby.
raise this little baby podcast. And I think we've done a pretty good job. And so I am proud of the last 99 episodes, and I'm excited about the next 100. So, Kari, cheers.
Cheers, Alan. Oh, we should clink.
We should clink.
And our champagne is in coffee cups. Playing above the line coffee cups.
Don't tell us. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. It definitely helps us in the ratings, and it also makes it easier for other folks to find the podcast. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group. If you want to know more about who we are and what we do, you can visit our website at avisogroup.com. That's AVIZO group.com. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.